for braving the rain this morning. If you are returning to us, welcome back. If you have not yet joined us and today is your first day here in the Global Embassy for Women's Leadership, welcome. I'm Elise Nelson, President and CEO of Vital Voices. And you know, it's so interesting when we were looking at the weather. I wasn't at all surprised there was going to be rain because it always seems that when women gather to do big things, it rains. So we're thrilled. So today we're going to start off our day really talking about women in crisis and women leading through crisis. I think as all of us obviously know, whether it's Ethiopia, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Ukraine, we know that in crisis, whether it be humanitarian, whether it be war, whether it be environmentally provoked, that women are always the greatest victims in times of crisis, women and girls. But what we also know is that they offer incredibly innovative solutions. And that's certainly where we come in, is supporting those leaders who step up in those times of crisis. I want to, before we start, just acknowledge our incredible team at Vital Voices, particularly those who work on our Voices Against Violence initiative. And just to give you a little bit more about that, our Voices Against Violence initiative is a partnership with the State Department and Avon, so it's a public-private partnership. We've been running it for the past, almost 8 years. We have supported thousands of women leaders who are survivors of extreme forms of gender-based violence. And I see Kara in the audience, so Kara, please stand up. And also the rest of the team, please stand up, because, come on. Because this is incredibly hard work. And they are really on the front lines every day supporting these leaders, so thank you. So we're going to show a quick film about the work that Vital Voices has been doing really since our founding days. But more recently, we've had to really ratchet up the work that we're doing because we're certainly seeing that our world is on fire right now. So we're going to watch a quick film, and then we'll get straight to the panel discussion. And I'm so thrilled to have in the house one of Vital Voices' founders, former chair and co-CEO, Milan Verveer, Ambassador Milan Verveer. And she's going to kick off the first panel, but we'll just have this short film first. Thank you.
Since the beginning, Vital Voices has supported and uplifted individual women leaders who dare to dream. Often behind the scenes and in their greatest times of need. Women leaders who have been targeted for daring to be educated, for daring to become doctors and judges and lawmakers, for daring to speak out. In 2021, when the Taliban issued a kill list naming hundreds of Afghan women leaders, Vital Voices joined a coalition of Afghan and American women and NGOs, including Bilqis Ahmadi, Huria Mossadegh, the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, and Mina's List, in collaboration with the U.S. State Department. Together, they provided safe houses and transport. They evacuated and relocated to safety more than 1,000 Afghan women leaders and their families. In times of crisis, women are the most vulnerable, but they are also the voices we need the most. When Ukraine was attacked, Vital Voices sent a team to Poland, Moldova, and Romania to meet with and provide life-saving services to a network of women's organizations across the region. This is the Vital Voices Crisis Response Team, mobilizing quickly to provide holistic on-the-ground support when women leaders need it most, and then supporting them until they are able to rise up again and lead, even after their plight is no longer in the headlines.
Good morning, everyone. Isn't it great to be back together again? We are embarking on a series of discussions this morning on a very difficult topic, which are the crises that confront us. And our panel here is kicking off with the horrible situation in Ukraine. We have been watching day after day since February the terrible assault, unprovoked assault on a democratic, independent, sovereign country, merely because it is that. And today there are now tens of thousands of casualties, people killed in this war, millions of internally displaced, people displaced across the borders, humanitarian attacks, the likes of which no one has seen in these times, completely abandoning all humanitarian norms, attacking hospitals, attacking homes, attacking train stations as people are trying to leave. Just a horrible, horrible situation. And where it's going, what we can do about it, and all of the questions that are on our minds, hopefully we will grapple with some of them with our panel this morning. We have very limited time, so I want to get right into it and introduce you to Ambassador Oksana Markarova, who is Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. She is the first female ambassador to Washington for her country. And I think by any standard, she is doing an extraordinary job, just with unstinting efforts on behalf of her country. Next to her is former President of Lithuania, Dalia Grybauskaitė, a great leader, a great friend of Vital Voices, and someone who continues to have enormous influence in the region. So we're eager to hear from her. And then here at the very end, our wonderful Oksana Horbanova. She has been with Vital Voices for almost 3 decades, telling us as the first Vital Voices conference many years ago when we were not an NGO, but we were part of the government. She started to warn about the trafficking problem in Ukraine, which was beginning to manifest itself. Nobody even knew what trafficking was back then. And Oksana finds herself in the United States now, forced to leave her country as her city was being bombed. So, Oksana, thank you for being with us. And I might add that she is very eager to return home, so we hope that day will come soon. Ambassador, if you could start us out and just give us a sense of an assessment. Where are we today in the war? What is Ukraine up against?
Thank you very much, Milan. And it's such a not just honor, but really a pleasure to be here with all the women. And thank you for Vital Voices for everything you are doing. You, Milan, has been an inspiration to so many women in Ukraine, and not only in Ukraine, even before I met you. And Madam President, it's an honor also, dear Dalia, to be together with you and Oksana. So where we are today, 72nd day of the war that actually goes on for 8 years. The war which Russia prepared for the past 400 years. And that's something that we have to understand. And that while globally there are so many injustices and cruelties, and there are so many killings that we all have to focus on and have to take care about and have to be more active in the future. Sometimes we are not active enough, and that leads and emboldens other aggressors. But what is very different about Ukraine is that it's a very black and white case of a large autocratic nuclear power that crossed the border and attacked a sovereign nation. It's not internal conflict, it hasn't been provoked, it's not something that came from, some internal differences. It's Russia that wants to rebuild its empire, that for the past 30 years of Ukraine regained independence, together with other countries that has been in the prison, together with us, the Soviet prison, and Russia has been saying it has been the greatest mistakes, and they were all this time building the capabilities and looking for window of opportunity to do so. So what do we have for 72 days? And thanks to very brave reporters who already lost 24 on the battlefield, from Ukrainian press but from others, we see what really goes on there. You know, attacks from north, east, west, all type of rockets, including the forbidden by the Geneva Convention, all type of atrocities. I mean, I cannot even list what type of atrocity Russians did not do on the grounds in Ukraine. We all know about Bucha, Irpin, other places, but it happens everywhere where they occupy the cities. Killings, tortures, rapes, attacking civilians, specifically attacking the hospitals and civilian infrastructure and people who are trying to flee. So it's a humanitarian catastrophe of massive proportion. But we also have to say that it's also an example of a very heroic resistance. If you go back to 72 days ago, the majority of experts were saying that Kyiv would fall in, what, 2 days, then 3 days, then 4 days. And here we are fighting. And the reason why we are not surrendering, and the reason why we're able to repel even much stronger enemy, much brutal enemy, the enemy that doesn't have any red lines, it's A, because, you know, the truth is on our side. B, we're defending our homes. C, it's not just our brave armed forces, our extremely brave president and the civil servants, but it's everyone, all 40 million of Ukrainians, whether in Ukraine or even when they're outside of the country, we all are fighting to defend our country. So what Putin and his criminal armed forces, because I would not even call them the army, are dealing with is all Ukrainians. And he can only destroy us. And of course, you know, the support from our friends and allies, which is critical. We are so much smaller. We are very motivated, but we are so much smaller. So we depend on all the military support, all the financial support, all the support, sanctions, very important, that has to be winded in order to stop Russia. And it's very important for all of us to stop Russia, not because we want Ukraine to be free, but also because we want to prevent this from happening anywhere else in the world. And we want to show that rule of law and the, you know, sacred borders of any country actually exist and can be defended.
Just really quickly as a follow-up, you've talked about this as the 1939 moment. Do you want to explain that in terms of the consequences for the free world?
Absolutely. I think, you know, again, it's very appropriate as we all approach in the 77th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And I think not a lot is, not enough is being said about how the World War II started. That it wasn't the Nazi Germany alone that started it, that it was Soviet Union together with the Nazi Germany in 1939 decided together to divide the Europe, attack sovereign countries, and some countries decided to look away. And then we ended up having a full-fledged war in Europe that was a devastating war for 5 years, 6 years almost, and that brought so many casualties to many countries. So Putin has been very clear from, you know, when he was elected and last year and before this attack. It's not only about Ukraine. It's about redrawing the map of Europe. It's about rebuilding, whether it's Soviet Union or Russian Empire or whatever they have in their sick plans. So nobody is safe. If Ukraine is attacked, being a peaceful country, without any provocation, only because we have chosen to be democratic, only because we have chosen to join the transatlantic family, or rather I should say return to the European transatlantic family, and we are attacked, then if that's the reason, then Poland is not safe, then Lithuania is not safe, Estonia is not safe, Latvia is not safe. And then listen to the attacks of Russia, verbal attacks during the past months. Sweden is bad, suddenly. You know, Finland, of course, is doing something wrong. Germany, they put publicly on their public television the maps where they see how much time it will take for their rockets to reach Paris or to reach Berlin or to reach London. What is this? You know, it's definitely, if we do not stop Russia, while it's still local in Ukraine, unfortunately we will be facing a risk of that being a much bigger war, and we have to avoid it at all costs possible. We know in Ukraine how difficult and devastating it is.
President Gubastak, the ambassador just mentioned so many of the countries in the region. You've been a leader in the region for a long time. Can you give us an assessment of how the neighborhood is now, both in terms of what's happening? We've got a huge refugee push. You've got worries about insecurity. But also, what does all of this mean for the present and the future from a regional perspective?
That already was mentioned that it's becoming out from the region, not regional, but really we are talking about the Fed war in Europe. And this is we're facing today in the form of democracies against autocracies. And that's a more general level what we are facing for. And we need to understand it, that today Ukraine is protecting Europe, is protecting the world with the bodies of their women and children. And we in the West, in the very beginning, was only watching how this uncivilized, different civilization even, attacked European country. We have been watching and started to react only a week late, seeing that Ukrainian military are not failing as it happened in Afghanistan. All our Western security intelligence services have been mistaken, providing information for politicians that Ukraine will fall. Why? Even before the war, the reaction of the West was very, very weak. We, already in December last year, said that there will be no NATO foot on the ground. Before the war, instead of putting our foot on the ground before the war to avoid the war, what we did, we invited Putin to invade. And I take it fully as a guilt on the West side. We gave Ukraine in from the very beginning. Only now, after we saw how heroic Ukrainians able to fight, and that they are protecting all of us, Europe and the world, from this wild, uncivilized country. We started to provide the weapons, but still not enough. We're still late. Our weaponry is only helping Ukrainians to stop the enemy, but not to push the enemy, and not to win the enemy. And it is very clear. The Putin needs to be crushed on the battlefield. No sanctions will stop him. No matter what kind of sanctions we introduce, he will not stop the war. He could be stopped only by force, because he understands only the force. And he don't need to save any face, because he do not have the face. And he don't need to have to save anything, because with his propaganda, he can sell anything at home. So why? We don't need to hesitate thinking that we need to comfort him in one or another way. We need to battle him. And only this can help the world and Ukrainians not to be fully destroyed. And we're today facing the huge challenge, geopolitical challenge, because all structure of security which we created after the Second World War, all international organizations we created after the Second World War to solve the problems of the world are under question today, under pressure to be irrelevant. If we will in the West, will be not able to help Ukraine not only to defend, but to kick Russians out from their territory. We are not asking or pretending or proposing to attack Russia. No. We only saying that we need to push them out where they not belong. That's today our obligation. And the longer the war will go, the more responsibility will be on the shoulders of the West. additional deaths, additional destroyment, it's our responsibility that we didn't support Ukraine on time and appropriately. So that's of neighborhood position. Because I'm from Lithuania, I came on just a few days ago, and we on the border with Kaliningrad region, that's Russia, and it is also Belarus on another side of the border. So in reality, we are squeezed between these two Russians, really. And we're trying to be as helpful as possible, of course, to our neighbor, Ukraine, but also to increase our capacities as NATO territory, not even deterrence now anymore, defense, because deterrence already forgotten. Nobody will deter him, we saw. We were able to do it before the war, all the West, but we didn't use this opportunity. And now we are running after the time. Running after the challenge, not facing still the challenge. That's what we need to be very seriously rethinking, be more active, enforcing our active support and help for Ukraine to win the war. Not to push, not to defend, but to win. To win on the battleground, because in general, you know, all of us, we know that there is no winners in the war. All parts will already are taking a lot of damage, all parts. But to be able to push aggressor out of country, we need militarily, by force, to help to do this, to whatever it takes. And why I still think and repeat myself that there was a strategic mistake from the West, that we said there will be no foot on the ground before the war. We were able to say, okay, all options on the table. We will use it, not use it, but and now it is a mistake which we need to repay. Something's already probably not repayable, but we need to repay and we need to take further responsibility on our shoulders, because this war is the West's responsibility, that we allowed Putin to invade and we grown the Putin to the level that he was able to invade.
And the whole international order, as you heard, is at stake as well. But let's go now to the personal level. We've been talking about the geopolitical implications and certainly the implications for Ukraine. The other Oksana Horbanova, was forced to leave her country temporarily. Her husband remains, as do many of her kin and friends. What are you hearing, and what do you know about what's happening on the ground, so to speak?
Actually, I have a big privilege to be here, and it is a big honor for me to be with the heroes. And actually, I had the privilege to be with Vital Voices almost 27 years. From the first steps, we started to work to build democracy in Ukraine. Ukrainian women are with Vital Voices. And actually, I'm so sorry for my today morning emotions, because it's not possible to read the news from Ukraine without tears. We've done a lot during the 27 years. Ukrainian women were on the front line to build democracy, to build system to protect human rights, to build the rule of law in Ukraine. And actually, we achieved and we were hardened during two recent revolutions, which in 2004, Orange Revolution, 2014, Revolution of Dignity, and women's NGO in solidarity were on the streets with the people to protect our democracy. And we win. We try to build the rule of law, and we choose the way to be with democratic society. We choose the way to move toward European style of living. And we became dangerous for the Russia. February 24, Russia interrupted our peace life. The evil came to our home. Thousands of families are separated. Hundreds of children are killed. Lots of families lost their children. Lots of children lost their parents. And it's not possible to speak without emotions. And my heart overloaded with the pain and anger. They are destroying not only countries, they are destroying whole nation. They are killing us because we are Ukrainians, because we are speaking Ukrainian language, because we are keeping our colors, yellow and blue flag, in our hands. Ukrainian women NGO, they are staying, they are not giving up their activities. Actually, I spent my last 25 years on counter-trafficking field, and we built counter-trafficking national model to support and protect Ukrainian survivors of trafficking. It took for us lots of skills to cooperate with national government, with the government of country of destinations. Actually, I started from first NGO to combat the trafficking, but during these years, it was built all Ukrainian coalitions against the trafficking. And right now it is about 30 women Ukrainian NGOs staying and ready to support victims of sexual violence. And actually, I'm proud to tell you that most of these NGOs, they are remaining in the country, and they are simply refocusing their efforts from counter-trafficking to help everybody who is escaping the bombing, who is escaping, who were forced to leave their homes and looking for the help. Currently, the former shelters which were constructed for victims of sexual violence, these shelters receiving refugees from all around Ukraine. UNHCR is informing about 13 million people right now who are forced and left their homes. 5.5 million are abroad. 7 million stay in Ukraine. And actually, women's NGO, without any specific humanitarian response training, started to help Ukrainian families. It was not time to conduct the trainings. It was necessary to act immediately. And actually, from the first weeks, we demonstrated the unity of our nations, because women from west part of Ukraine, women from Ternopil, Ivano-Frankivsk, Uzhhorod, Chernivtsi, were provided the help with the dignity for the women from east part of Ukraine. And we demonstrated the unities between east and west, between people who speak Ukrainian and who are not Ukrainian speakers. This is the issue which was manipulated by Kremlin and by Putin for many, many years. And this is the issue which they try to justify the war. But women demonstrated this unity, and I'm proud to be part of this movement. Actually, what Ukrainian women is doing right now, doing everything to help families to survive. And most of refugees, it is women with the children, grandparents with the children. An issue of trafficking, especially right now, is dangerous for this category of vulnerable people. And I have mentioned that 5 million abroad. Ukrainian women organizations, they try to coordinate the transportation of Ukrainian women to another country, with Poland, with Spain, with Germany, with France, with another country, and we are really appreciated to this country who are receiving our women and our families. And we try to inform people about the trafficking issue, and also, of course, it's necessary police involvement. And actually, in Ukraine, we built very strong law enforcement system to protect Ukrainians from trafficking. But right now, police is not able to focus on the trafficking. What right now police is doing? Counter-trafficking units, they are patrolling the cities, because sabotage groups, they are very active in our cities. And we have to strengthen our efforts to protect the cities, to protect the people who are staying in the city, and to coordinate counter-trafficking efforts with the country of destinations. Actually, I was lucky because Vital Voices proposed me to be evacuated, and actually I was hesitating for a long time, should I go or not. But my husband told me, you have to go. If you will survive, you will help others to survive. Actually, you know, and he's staying in Kiev. He's 63 years old. He has possibility to leave, but he joined the local defense forces to protect the cities, to help the people who are staying. And actually, it is solidarity between Ukrainian people. We start to help each other like never before. I have mentioned our experience when we supported each other during the revolution time, when men and women came together to protect our democracy. Here, right now we see the same solidarities between women, men, between people from different parts of Ukraine, because we know the price of independence, we know the price of democracy. And we will defend, and I strongly believe we will win. And it is not only issue of war between Ukraine and Russia, it is the issue of confrontation between civilizations, between dictatorships, and between democracy and the rights to live in another style. And we will never accept the dictatorships. We will never give up our fight. And Ukrainians, the Ukrainian women, they're in front line to defend the democracy. And I salute their courage. And we appreciate it to each country who are helping us. And actually, together with Vital Voices, we already started to support several organizations. They are working in different parts of Ukraine, in the West Ukraine, and organizations which are staying near the front line, like in Zaporizhia, in Dnipro. These organizations, they are serving and they are helping people who are evacuated from Mariupol, from another occupied territories. And they are working in very hard way. I just was on the telephone in the morning with Zaporizhia, and they told me that yesterday they helped 400 Ukrainian families who just arrived from the bomb shelters. These people is very exhausted. They are sick. They fear because they spent months without heat system, without electricity, with limited food, with limited water. And actually, these organizations, they have managed to coordinate the efforts with social workers, with medical experts, with teachers, with educators, to help children to overcome these challenges.
So, Oksana, you're going to be here the rest of the day and tomorrow, and everybody can have a chance to talk to you, but you have made very real this morning, through your voice and your presence, just what it means to be a Ukrainian involved in dealing with this terrible assault. So we can talk to you some more individually and beyond. We have very little time left, so I want to go back to President Grubaskaita for a minute and ask her about how Putin is using the whole issue of energy as a lever, particularly with respect to Europe, which has been so dependent on Russian energy, and what Lithuania and others are doing, what we need to do now to change that situation. And then we'll end up with Ambassador Markarova, and we'll have to close.
Okay. So it was very clear, then I came to office in 2009, that Russia is using energy resources as the tool of geopolitical influence, buying and corrupting European policies and politics, including political parties. This was very clear, and after my first meeting in 2010 with Putin, I realized that there is no chance to have honorable relations with this country. We were paying, Baltic states, Lithuania was paying 40% more for gas than Germany was paying, because we were too independent. We didn't kneel in front of Putin. This was very clear for me, and all my efforts went to make Lithuania energy independent. It was difficult, but in 2 years, already, in 2.5, we built it LNG terminal. In 2015, it started to work. So Lithuania, the first from all European Union, became fully independent from Russian gas, fully. Today, Lithuania, the first, from the 1st of April, said we are not buying neither oil, neither gas from Russia at all. And we're helping even today, because we opened the pipeline just from the 1st of May with Poland, even Poland to do it, and our neighbors, Latvia and Estonia. We are, from this point of view, an example that we were not allowed to corrupt us. While our neighbors in Germany, for example, will not name the names, ex-French Prime Minister, Austrian Foreign Minister dancing on her wedding and then receiving the position. That's exactly the countries which today are facing a lot more difficulties. But I want to say that I'm acknowledging that Germany is doing a lot. They tend very much. They're agreeing to cut oil by the end of this year, and gas, of course, because infrastructure needed in two years approximately. I heard today that Hungary is a little bit mingling again, but it's again nothing about, it's about political corruption, and it's nothing about real political, because if you have political will, you can do anything, anything. We, small country, without European monies, we did this in 2.5 years, because we knew what that means. And I didn't agree during the meeting with Putin to give in on anything, because, and that was very clear that after this, we will be hunted economically at that time. And why? All efforts went into this. So now Europe will become more independent, I am sure. In 2 years' time, it will be absolutely different landscape. And the political willingness of countries to do this is already on the table, except maybe the countries who do not have access to the sea, plus some collaborators with Putin. But this is only 1 or 2 countries, and this will be overcome. So from this point of view, the understanding that energy is a geopolitical tool became very clear to everybody in Europe. And the political examples of political corruption, not only as political system, but also private, personal, was terrible mistakes. It is still shameful. It is still shameful for Europe to see such leaders, ex-leaders, to be bought, so primitively bought by Russian monies. But that's exactly how Russia was influencing Europe. With corruption, or if you're not agreeing, you just destroy it, or you under attack, or other means. There was no neutrality, or you friend or you enemy. So the same is in everything, not only in economy, but the same is in everything. If Ukrainians will be saying, fine, we're neutral, we are happy to see you and friendful and whatever, and we will give in some our independence, and probably everything will be not so bad. Huh? But, as I said, there is no really something in the middle, or your friend, or let's say giving in on everything, or your enemy. That's what I understood from my first meeting. I thanks God to the last one. And why it was very clear what we need to do. But of course, I paid personal prize for every support of Ukraine. After the Crimea occupation, any article where I was criticizing Putin, I paid the price. Informational attacks. There was a book published against me, knew my biography in English, and distributed to every European member of parliament. Yes, to destroy my reputation. So that's, but you need to choose. You take on yourself the heat and protect as much as you can, whatever you're able to do on the international arena to help Ukraine, to make awareness in the West what is happening, or you comfort yourself, maybe even financially and easy personally, so it's your choice. Always, it's your choice. So why Lithuanian example shows only one thing. It's commitment and political will. And try to avoid as much as possible to be corrupted by Putin. That's it. And this, everything is possible. It, of course, maybe will take few years, but now awareness is on the table. The shameful examples are on the table, and the price, what all Europe and Ukraine is paying, is also on the table.
And to maintain your integrity as you have. So thank you for your model of leadership. So, Ambassador, in the little time we have before we have to let the next panel take over here, even though we could talk all day about this, what should we be doing? What more do we need to be doing? Oksana talked about the humanitarian crisis, the great needs on the ground, the women's organizations who are struggling. I talked to an NGO representative recently, and she said, I never thought in my life, instead of asking for the typical aid I've always asked for, that I would be asking for weapons and defense, because we will not survive without that. So the President has another package that he has sent up to the Hill for $30 billion for Ukraine. You're the advocate and representative for Ukraine in this city. What is happening in terms of the United States vis-a-vis Ukraine, and what more do we need to do in your view?
Thank you. Well, the answer to your question, what do we have to do, is everything. So essentially, you know, military support is essential. Number one priority, because as Madam President said, it has to be won on the battlefield. Putin only understands the force. So weapons are the most needed humanitarian assistance that we need. Because every weapon that we receive, every support in that we receive, means that we will be able not only to stop Putin, but to liberate the cities. And again, we see from Bucha and Mariupol and Kharkiv what happens when the cities are under occupation. So it's saving lives. Giving us weapons is saving lives of Ukrainians and defending the democracy. The 33 billion we're advocating, if it could be more, we would be very grateful. But the time is of the essence. We need it to be adopted. We need it to be adopted fast, so that Pentagon, together with our armed forces, can continue on the supplies. The financial, energy, and all other economic support is also very important. To run out of money would be as dangerous as to run out of weapons. And the 50% of our economy is destroyed. It's actually amazing. And we have to say that we were right in all the reforms that we have been doing during the past 8 years, that our financial system still stands, our banks still operate, our companies are showing remarkable resilience, moving from destroyed cities to the west, somewhere continuing to deliver. The logistics inside Ukraine, even though it's been bombed constantly, is being repaired, and we are still delivering the food and goods and everything else. The humanitarian support is very important. And, you know, it's not just, you know, the well-coordinated, you know, I mean, we still have the very functioning government, we have the NGOs, so all the supports, support any organizations that you have. But essentially, everything anyone can do matters. A one-person protest in front of the Russian embassy matters. A one-person, you know, tweet or Facebook message or Instagram post matters. We all have to stop reacting to what Putin wants and say what we want. Because for way too long, and I think Madam President and everyone has been very direct and straightforward about it, for way too long, we all were tiptoeing around the Russian Federation and thinking, you know, if we do this, what would happen? You know, can we do this or that? I think it's very clear to everyone. It cannot be not clear what Russian Federation plans are. And the question is, are we ready to do everything possible in order to stop it? And that's what I would like to ask everyone to do on a daily basis.
Thank you. So we end this discussion with a call to action to each and every one of us. Thank you, Ambassador Margarova. Thank you, President Gruspaita. Thank you, Oksana.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are, thank you. Thank you, Malala. No. There's no way to do these conversations in this amount of time, quite frankly. We're going to transition now to talk about the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Francesca Donor. She is many of you are probably followers of her. She is the former gender director at the New York Times and the editor-in-chief of In Her Words, an incredible editorial newsletter piece from the New York Times covering women's issues. So anyway, thank you for being here. I'll let you introduce the panel.
Hi, everyone. It's such an honor to be able to moderate this panel with three absolutely extraordinary women. I woke up this morning and I kind of thought, what on earth am I doing on the stage? I should just let the three of them talk together. They have many thoughts and ideas, and we will get into them. So this morning we're going to be talking about Afghanistan, and I'm sure everyone in this room knows the history en bref. Following 2001, women made extraordinary gains in Afghanistan. And these were not gains that were handed to women as much as gains that women took for themselves. Girls started going to school, degrees were earned, women became journalists, lawyers, politicians, judges, and then August came along, and we all know that story. Those who had to get out scrambled to get out, leaving behind a lifetime of career, family, loved ones, homes, possessions, dresses in a closet. And those who stayed behind had almost immediately overnight their rights chipped away. They couldn't travel without a male escort. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't learn. Today, I'm really sad to be talking about this issue. I feel like we've been talking about it for many years. We've had this conversation for too long. This conversation is going on. And I really wish we could be talking about something else. I really do. There are so many other things I would love to discuss with you. But Afghanistan is in a really challenging and terrible state right now. We all know that. The statistic I read is that the poverty level is at 97%. 97%, I'll let that sink in for a moment. That means 3% are doing okay. That's unacceptable. So, I'm very delighted to introduce my panelists. You probably know them all already. We have Adela Raz next to me. She is the former ambassador of Afghanistan to the US. Welcome. Thank you for being here. In the middle, we have Rina Amiri. She is the special envoy for Afghan women, girls, and human rights. Thank you for being here. And then on the end, we have Muqaddesa Yorish. She is the Deputy Trade Minister for Afghanistan. And I want to say one quick thing. It's so ludicrous to reduce these women to a one-line biography. It's almost laughable. They have all done so many extraordinary things and have lived multiple lifetimes of doing amazing, amazing and wonderful things. And we're going to hear about them today. But now that you know who they are, I would like to start by asking a question of all of them. And it was a question that they pushed back on a little bit this morning. Two of them said, oh, it's not interesting. And I said, oh, yes, it is interesting. You all have traveled and arrived in the US in some way, and all of the ways that you got here are quite different. So I would like to begin by having you tell your story and share that with the room, and then we'll go from there. So, Adela, why don't you go first?
Let me first of all thank Vital Voices for the invite. Post August 15, I've been really shying away to stay in because it's pretty emotional to get out into public. But this is an institution and an organization that I believe in their work, so I truly respected the invite and I wanted to come out. And thank you, Francesca. I'm glad to be here among friends and colleagues. I first arrived to the US in 2004, and I came for my education to study in the US. So I did both my bachelor and my master's, and then, like many young women at the time who have so much hope and aspiration to be independent and strong, and Fletcher does a good job to train you as a global citizen. So I stayed in DC and I started to work for an international development organization. But I was telling Rina Jan, it doesn't take you too long for many Afghans when you go back to square one, which for me was March of 2013 that I decided to go back to Afghanistan. And I decided to work for the government because until that moment I had not worked for government. And it was a decision because, if all of you remember, it was a decision by the administration at the time to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. And I saw myself here in this town going around and telling people not to leave the country, but I found myself being here already. So I said, this is very hypocrite of me to ask them not to leave, and I'm here. So I went. That was one decision. And the second, I wanted to work for the government because I had so much criticism of the government. So for me, it was, if I wanted to bring changes, I need to be part of the change. And that was my journey. So when I went back, and my second time when I came here, I came in 2019 as the ambassador to the United Nations. And then it was just before the fall that I moved to Washington as the ambassador to the US. And now I'm revealing, and the State Department officials will not be happy to hear that my first formal meeting was with Defense, with the DOD. It wasn't with the State Department. I had to publicize it, vice versa, first State Department meeting and then the DOD, because I arrived and my country was in a chaos already, and I had to go and ask for support. So I'm going to stop here because the rest is pretty tough and hard. But my family members had more an exciting or difficult journey who came post August 15 to join me here.
Thank you for sharing that. Rina, why don't you tell your story?
Thank you. My story, I think, goes back to the origins of the conflict when the monarchy in Afghanistan was overthrown. I was a small child, and like many Afghans, and this is why it was so haunting, August 15th, is we left with 2 suitcases. I was allowed to bring 1 doll. We weren't allowed to tell anyone except close family members we were leaving because my father was under threat. We took a bus to Pakistan, and then we're in a place of uncertainty in terms of where we would end up. We spent 2 years in India and my aunt's house and couldn't get paperwork, didn't know whether we were going to go to Afghanistan or going elsewhere. And I just remember as a child just constantly asking my parents, why did we have to leave home? Why did we have to leave our family? And they would talk about politics, and I'd say, who is politics? And why has politics done this to us? And I hate politics. And I think it's the origin story of why I have chosen the path that I have, that sense of injustice of other people's politics making us homeless, making us, at that point, countryless before we came to the US. And it's that journey that I see repeated that ultimately this is why I've come back into the US government as well. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Please.
Morning, everyone. I have to start by saying, that I was here yesterday, and this has been a retreat for me to be able to, just be in this room and the energy, and just, be among fellow women, and constantly say that women should be, if women would have been leading the world, we didn't have to sit on the stage today and talk about tragedy and crisis, transitioning from Ukraine to Afghanistan, one tragedy after another. I also have to say, Francesca, that I have to emphasize that I'm a former deputy minister. And the reason I say that is because I don't want to, even if I would have an offer right now, I don't want to be working for the Taliban government. I decided to, I don't think it was really a decision, but I ended up being in the US last August after the collapse of Kabul. I was in Kabul, I was actually in office when Taliban took over, and I think the reason my family and I ended up being in Afghanistan until the last day is I have never seen myself anywhere else but in Afghanistan. I'm sitting here today, but my soul is back home. I wake up every morning thinking, I'm in the US temporary, and I cannot wait to be back home. And if tomorrow I know that I can be back home and I have a guarantee that the Taliban will not pose a threat to me, to my security and the security of mostly my family members, I want to be home. I'm grateful, to the opportunity of safety that has been given to me by our fellows here in the US, particularly Vital Voices. I cannot thank you enough. But I have to tell you that at times I wake up and I'm resentful about being in the US. I don't know how I feel about being in the US, knowing that US and other international partners played such an outsized role in the way things unfolded back home, and that the leadership that the US could have shown in managing the situation was not shown by the US. So to be here while so many are suffering back home, so many of my fellow countrymen and women, it's an interesting state of being, I have to say. So, you asked me how I ended up being here. I don't really know if I'm here, It's an interesting state of being to be here. And my state of being is actually rather complicated now, especially being in the US this week. I woke up to the news that I'm sure many are grappling with it here in the US. But to be a woman, to be an Afghan woman in the US this week, my state of being is just complicated. I'll leave it there.
I was really well put, and I think gratitude is such an interesting and complex word that you had to use. I mean, last night you and I were talking about, quote unquote, being one of the lucky ones who was able to get out, and yet so traumatizing of everything that you left behind, all the small things, the big things, the obvious things, and the subtle things. It's heartbreaking. I've also heard you say that you're actually a third-generation refugee, and that really kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I wonder if you can just speak to that just for a moment. It's awful.
It's the case of Afghanistan is complicated. I actually, if there's one thing clear about my being here in the state is that I now teach at George Washington University. I'm doing a course on Afghanistan, and I cannot be grateful enough for that opportunity, because I probably, the only use that I can make of my time here in the US is to try to tell people how complicated of a case we are You know, it's, I sometimes joke with my students in the US and tell them, you know, that you almost had a clean slate when you started to build a country, you know, and that's not as easy for us. Afghanistan is unfortunately seen from a lens of post 9/11, and that's also what I put emphasis on my course at GW, is that I try to give everybody a foundation of, you know, Afghanistan pre-2001, because the reason that we, you know, got it wrong with Afghanistan is not because Afghanistan is an inherently corrupt country, that Afghans are inherently corrupt, that we are inherently chronically ungovernable. You know, these are the type of narratives that you hear about Afghanistan out there. But the problem is that, you know, as much as it is about, you know, how the Afghan people have failed to come together and managing their country, it's also about the international policy choices that are constantly being made about Afghanistan that are wrong. And we continue to get it wrong about Afghanistan, including the lens that we have about Afghanistan today. You know, I understand that there's a humanitarian crisis unfolding back home, but I keep telling people, you know, as long and until you continue treating Afghanistan as a charity case and as a humanitarian case, you're stripping the Afghan people of their political agency to decide for their country. And if you continue doing that, you know, this is not going to work. And I'm so happy, you know, that people like Rena John are there on the U.S. government administration side, you know, to try to hopefully make it right. I'm not really sure, you know, John, I understand you have a difficult job. I don't really know if there's a way to make it right at this point, you know, but I think if one thing I want to emphasize, Francesca, is that it is as much of a political crisis back home as much as a humanitarian one. Taliban are unfortunately part of our political reality. They are not the whole of our political reality. I and Ambassador Ross are as much of a political reality of the country as much as the Taliban. So the political aspirations of the Afghan people needs to be reflected on what the future might hold for the country. You know, just trying to think that the Taliban are, you know, the only force that can govern the country forward, I think, is not the solution. And I think this is the reason that you talked about, like, why 3 generations of women in my family have been refugees and have been living in war, because we have been constantly getting it wrong about Afghanistan, you know, unless and until we try to, you know, see that country for the complicated case that it is. I think it's just, you know, difficult to try to change things for better. And, you know, yeah, and if you want to know more, please join my course, because there's no way I can unpack this, you know, here.
We'll send a
I'm
web
also
link
given 10 minutes, you know, so.
You need a podcast.
I need a podcast, yeah. Thank you.
You need a podcast. We send the web link so everyone can enroll in the class. That was really interesting, and there's so many points that you hit on that I want to come back to, including, in particular, the portrayal of women in Afghanistan. But Rena, I'd like to actually go to you as a problem solver. Well, you're all problem solvers, okay, but you were appointed to this post. I got it wrong. I said it was 5 months. You said, no, it's 4 months. Okay, 4 months ago, you've been in this extraordinarily challenging and interesting role. And, you know, one of the questions I had is it's a bit of a simple question, but hopefully quite open-ended for you. Where do you even begin? With something so complicated, what rises to the top of the to-do list? Because everything feels urgent, everything feels like a crisis, and everything feels really intractable at the same time.
That's a good depiction.
Sorry.
No, I think process is as important as some of the objectives, and I do agree that part of the problem in the last several decades of engagement in Afghanistan has been how we've approached the problem. One of my biggest priorities when I came in is I noted to the administration, I've noted publicly many times, is despite my Afghan heritage, I'm not there to represent Afghan women. I have not lived through their reality. I have not lived in the war. My role is to bring their voices in. You know, there is a mischaracterization of Afghan women and Afghans as victims. They're agents, they're leaders, and our policies both in the US and internationally, would be vastly improved by bringing their voices into our policy making. So I'm establishing platforms and networks to bring those voices in and to US policy making, and also engaging our allies to make sure that other platforms are established. To my office, as we're establishing this, we've had at least, I think, 50 consultations with Afghan women, and what we do is take, and I make sure that it's not just my office, but it's every part of the government that has an equity in Afghanistan. They're invited in, they're asked to come in to listen, and not only to listen, but to say what they're doing and to take input in terms of how our policies could be improved. I think that that's a fundamental part. If I do this right, it not only improves us in Afghanistan, it improves our processes everywhere. Conflicts are everywhere. It's much messier, and diplomacy should be much more complicated than talking to member states. Right now, if you look at any conflict, you see that the stakeholders, both in terms of warring parties and in terms of peacemakers, are multifaceted and complex, and we need to integrate their voices for better policy making. Two, I'm engaging, I really prioritize bringing the Muslim world into making the case for women's rights and human rights. I know to them what the Taliban are doing is not just bad for Afghan women, it's bad for Islam, and it's bad for the Muslim world, for the Taliban to showcase this as Islam. And I've said the US and the West cannot be the lonely voices calling on for women's rights and human rights. You need to be at the lead. I've engaged Muslim majority countries, the OIC, and I feel like they are increasingly taking that message and putting out more statements in support of Afghan women. And there's much more, but we need a different forum for that. But at least I want to talk a little bit about the process, and we can come back to some of the issues later.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I want to just say, like, if we could just listen, right? If we could just listen to people, things would be perhaps in a really different place. And it's so obvious, but so impossibly hard to do. I think all three of you have really expressed totally legitimate frustration about how Afghan women are portrayed. And, Adela, you've also spoken about how the rest of the world should consider Afghan women as partners, not just victims. There's always this sort of victimization, which is really frustrating. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that, if you don't mind.
I think not only me, there is a large number of Afghan women who believes, even despite the gray and the most difficult day right now we are. Because, as Muqaddasa said, for last 4 decades, and now it's 5 or even 6, we have lost the number of decades. The conflict in Afghanistan for sure is continuously happening, and there are many opportunities that Afghan women had lost to progress and move forward. But whenever those pockets of opportunities had arrived in the history, we had taken an excellent advantage of it. And I think, like many women around the world, we just know what does it mean not to be educated. So once we're given the chance to be educated, we do great. And I think that's what happened to women of Afghanistan as well, and to women around the world. A lot have changed, and I think there is much in our perspective that we need to adjust to the realities. Even today, I think Rina Jan said, it's so hard to represent the voice of Afghan women inside the country, because to me, they already are the strongest representation of their own voices. And as you said, we just have to listen to them. And we have not been listening to them. They're out in the street. They are demanding their rights. They're the first voice in the country that have came out, not the men, who asked for education not only for themselves, but for the rest of the society. They also ask for access to work, and it's not only that they want to be outside of their home, but they want to contribute effectively to the society. And those are the examples we have been constantly saying. Women of Afghanistan are partners, and globally, I think comparatively, I worked at the UN, and every time when Afghan woman came and spoke, I could see in the room that voice was moving and that voice was strong. It wasn't a voice to only ask for help. It was a voice that was providing constructive recommendation on how do we look into these complex challenges and provide the solutions that we think it's appropriate. And that's where I come in, and most of my colleagues and my friends, and we say, we are your partners. Yes. At this stage, I think that statement is a little bit more challenging because women of Afghanistan in the country are the victim, but they are also the change maker. Nothing has stopped them. They have been tortured, they have been detained, they have been threatened. The entire intelligence system inside the country right now, it doesn't work against a foreign enemy, it works against women. And that really tells you where we have arrived. So to me, that's where always when I've had the hardest moments, I've looked up, and I've looked up to women who have taken these steps before me, and that's where I get my inspiration, and I say, no, we can make the change. And victimhood, I think, overall, we're in the 21st century. My great criticism arrives to even a good friend of mine works at UN Women, the approach United Nations has to women empowerment. I think there is Muqaddasa needs to teach another class, or maybe somebody else that needs to do on women empowerment, how the approach needs to change. There is not anymore the passive voices, there has to be an active voices. So that's where my statement, or where my argument arrives, and I still believe.
Thank you. Am I allowed to say I agree with everything you said?
Thank you.
Muqaddasa, we've talked about this as well. I mean, we've all talked about this, and we're all frustrated with it. And we've talked a lot about the sort of the portrayal of Afghan women in the press as the victims. Again, there's that word. And I just want to give you the opportunity quickly to respond to that.
Okay.
If you have anything to add, love to hear it.
Thank you. Well, I have a lot to add, and everybody has told me only 30 minutes, so here, I'll try to make it short. Listen, when 9/11 happened, we all remember that First Lady Bush went on NPR and she talked about saving the Afghan woman. I remember listening to that with my mother, and we were both refugees back then in Pakistan, because the first period when Taliban took over between 96 to 2001, my family back then also decided that they wanted me to be educated, so they didn't want to live under Taliban, and we went to Pakistan. I remember very clearly that there was this question on my mother's face. She didn't need saving. She was a refugee in Pakistan, right? She had already did everything that she could do to save herself and me and my sister, right? So there was this big question mark on my mother's face about, what exactly was this First Lady of the US talking about, saving the Afghan woman, right? And when I talk about getting it wrong policy choices, wrong lens, wrong narrative, this is exactly what I'm talking about. The post-9/11 war in Afghanistan was a global war on terror. It was not about saving Afghan women. Let's get our narratives right. Because if it would have been about saving Afghan women, we tried to use that card in the lead up to, the Americans exiting. Because nothing else was working, right? And we're women. I know my cards. So I said, let's pull the Madam Bush card and be like, if nothing else is working, let's remind them why you guys came here in the first place. And now we are not saying don't leave, but we are just saying don't leave the way you're leaving. Don't hand us over to the Taliban, right? We advocated for that for 3 years in the lead up, in the entire peace process, and in the lead up to the Americans negotiating with the Taliban to get out. That didn't go anywhere, right? So, and I think and then after that, this entire 20 years of engagement in Afghanistan became about saving Afghan women and became about empowering Afghan women. You know, we could use the help. I agree with that. You know, I don't deny the fact that many decades of conflict, of course, had consequences for everybody, including the woman. So the women of Afghanistan did, could use some help, solidarity from the women in the globe. But the lens of empowerment and this victim lens has depoliticized us. And women, I cannot tell you enough what happens when you're depoliticized. And for those of you who were here yesterday, we talked about, how policy and politics work together. Ambassador Raz and I were technocrats when we moved to the government. But today we are both, politicians. And we became politicians because we realized we had to become politicians, otherwise nobody would have bought our policy work, right? So, and I am, if anything, I'm a product of that post 9/11 engagement in Afghanistan. But I became this person not because I needed saving, not because the Americans helped me or empowered me, for that matter. If anything, I'm a product of my parents' investment in me, including going to Pakistan back in '96 to make sure that I get an education, right? So I cannot emphasize enough that we need to get the lenses right. So now today what has happened, after 20 years of engagement in Afghanistan, we still think that the Afghan women are victims. No? Because when we walked into it first, we didn't really believe in the agency of the Afghan woman. We didn't believe in our mission of saving Afghan women, because the mission was never about saving Afghan women. It was about a global war on terror, right? So going forward, and I'm again so grateful that somebody like Representative Rina is there who understands it, and I have to give it to her. She has reached out to us. We have been talking to her. That I keep saying, if it is about war on terror, if it is about national security, please let it be about national security. Use that language. Leave the Afghan woman alone. If you can't help us, don't make it more complicated for us. We will figure it out by ourselves. If you can extend your solidarity, your support, thank you. If you cannot, I am done being a victim. And so are the women who are demonstrating on the streets of Afghanistan today that they are no victims. And if you just think wearing this veil makes us victim, you need to, I will do a course on politics of veil, so you get why I'm wearing this.
Thank you. We're looking forward to the politics of the veil. Okay, well, I know this is very upsetting, but we're running quite near to time, so I'd like to put my next question to you, Rina. And clearly Afghanistan is experiencing a humanitarian crisis, a political crisis. You pointed out to me that there are about 500 other crises that it's experiencing. And I'd really like to hear from you where do we engage with this impossible challenge of, where do we begin with engaging with the Taliban? Do we engage? How do we engage? How do we fix, or I don't even know if it's fixed. How do we address a humanitarian crisis when we need to talk to the Taliban? Where do we begin?
I would reframe it as not just addressing the humanitarian, because it's all embedded in it's a complex whole of the political, the humanitarian, the human rights situation, migration. There's a multiplicity of different, and there's no sequencing of these issues. We have to approach doing many difficult things at the same time. And it does require engaging the Taliban. As a mediator, one of my former bosses, Lakhtar Brahimi, he always said, and he was talking about one of his previous mediation efforts in Lebanon. He said, look, if I want to talk to the Lebanese that I like, I'll go to France, I'll go to the streets of Lebanon. Those are not the people that I need to talk to. I need to talk to the ones that are that are going to be instrumental to managing bringing some of those difficult actors and having that discussion. So I've consistently said, both before I joined the government and in the government, that we need to engage. But there are degrees of engagement, and there are different ways of engaging. There's engaging at a working level to address technical issues. There's engaging at a diplomatic level, and then at what diplomatic level? And all of that matters. There are no blunt tools in diplomacy, and we. since I've joined the government, I have engaged the Taliban both in Doha and in Oslo. Have engaged with them, through email. And I do believe that engagement is necessary for a number of different issues. One is on the technical issue. The UN has been at the forefront of addressing the humanitarian issues, and they have had to sit down with the Taliban to negotiate very difficult issues, including not disrupting humanitarian access, not interfering in terms of what the UN has to do to get the UN and international organizations to get aid and support out to the rest of the country, and so, to address the fact that they are the reality on the ground. There are many different issues that have to be worked out with them. There are many technical issues that have to be worked out with them. At the diplomatic level, to address the issue of women's rights and human rights, one of the things that I noted with all of these consultations, when we sit down with the Taliban, we bring in their voices, their messages, their priorities into the discussion and make it absolutely clear to the Taliban that what they are addressing is not the US interests or US priorities. They're addressing the priorities of the Afghan people, and we push them to have engagements directly with Afghans inside the country. So what we're trying to advance is getting the Taliban to do what they should have done from the outset in terms of not being afraid of their own, the population that they want to govern, not prioritizing the international community over the Afghan population. Those are we're trying to engage on a number of different levels, on a number of difficult issues, and I think it's a necessity. I know that the response from a lot of Afghans that I hear is, that there's a concern that it gives them legitimacy. They're concerned that there hasn't been an output. And I have to say, since March 23rd, it has been an inflection point for us, because we have gone back to the Taliban and said, we're talking with you in detail, if once again what becomes clear is that the Taliban are going to use their rhetorical devices without implementing any of their commitments, then there's going to have to be a rethink. But right now, I think we are still testing the proposition, and I think that is necessary at this point, simply because I think there are very few choices right now in terms of not engaging, given that it's incumbent upon us to try to put everything at our disposal to address just the whole host of issues that are confronting Afghanistan.
Thank you. That's an impossibly hard needle to thread, and I think we have to appreciate that. I'm going to ask one last question of you, Adela, and then I'm going to ask my last question, okay? The last question, I promise, is really short, but I'm getting eyes from over there, so you have to be a little bit quick. But I really wanted to mention this because it's very important. Okay, you've partnered with Princeton to found the Afghanistan Policy Lab, and I'm going to quote this. It's going to help build an inclusive, peaceful, and prosperous Afghanistan, equally representing all citizens, which I love and I want, and I know we all want, but it almost feels like a dream. Is such a thing possible? Also, you have to be really quick because of the eyes.
Yes. Look, I grew up in a family where my father always told me to train a woman in the country. He said, always dream high, because if you don't even reach the highest level, the minimum would be still a better result. So with the Afghanistan Policy Lab at Princeton, which that I am leading, it's a hope to reach to that goal. We must have a goal. There is no way if I just sit back and say, look, it's a disaster, it's a conflict, and there is no solution. Then, because I grew up with hope for betterness in Afghanistan. In my darkest days of life, which was 25 years ago, as a young woman in the country, I was not allowed to go to school during previous time when Taliban were in the country. And then there was no media in terms of the coverage that we get today. There was no cell phones and 3G internets and social media to hear the stories. And I really didn't even know there was an outside like today. I know it exists. We were in complete isolation. I still kept a hope for a brighter day. And that hope, I don't want to lose it. But there was one day, August 15 in the morning, I had lost hope. And I remember that morning I was disoriented. I really had no idea who I was. And I had to pull myself back to create direction. And I think that is the direction. So at Policy Lab, the Afghanistan Policy Lab, we hope to elevate the voices, as Rina said, elevate the voices of Afghans from different aspects of the society and be able to propose the ways on how to move forward. Because I think it comes back to that victimhood. A lot of time we were in places, and this is the way I grew up, when policies arrived to us and we had to implement it, and a lot of time in the ground we said, it doesn't work, right? It does not work. And of course, we didn't have the mean, we didn't have the ability, we didn't know how to do it. And here we are, and this is, I think, one step forward to be the partner and stay in this town, in this city, and with the support of Princeton, to really propose policy recommendation that we feel humbly would be appropriate for Afghanistan, and that includes every aspect. And we know it's a very ambitious goal, but one thing we at least say, if we can't change it, at least can we influence it? And I think there we are pretty modest with our hope and aspiration as fellows and among my team.
Good. I'm glad you're doing it. Okay, this is my last question. This may be more a reflection on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, but are you ready? It's just a short answer. A year from now, 1 year from today, are we better, worse, or about the same? Who wants to go first? Rina, you go first.
You know,
1 year. Is 1 year okay? You want 5 years? We do 1 year. 1 year.
Our problem is that we've approached Afghanistan with 1 year timelines.
Okay.
That's why we are where we are.
Okay.
No, I mean, the way I'm going to couch this is my hope is not couched in not of a when or not of an if, but when. You know, and I think that's the way we need to talk about Afghanistan. And investing in what we have worked on for the last 2 decades, investing in the Afghan population and women who are at the forefront of the fight inside Afghanistan for those gains is a must. There's no option of being pessimistic. You know, every Afghan says that is not a luxury we can afford. So I would say, I don't want to put a timeline on it, but I must say it's a must.
Okay. All right, Adela. Adela.
I think I will be a little bit political in this stage. And I'm going to go with Rina. When we think in the short-term goal, I must say the U.S. foreign policies always establishes a vision for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And here we are, looking to the region, and just the panel before, the country they were dealing with, either for the worse or the bad, their vision is much longer than 4 or 5 or 10. So I think this is where we have to start once again adjust our approach to challenges in Afghanistan as well. It's, as I said, it's not a matter of time, it's the matter of when, and we have to be patient. And I think one thing else that we must not forget is the people of Afghanistan. It's a country with 38 million population, and now the regime that's controlling it, it's about 60,000, 80,000. Mm-hmm. So it's an entire population that believes in the hopes and aspiration we have. And we can't just assume this is the de facto reality, the majority has to adopt to the minority. It must be the other way around, and regardless how much struggle it takes and how much time it takes, we must go forward.
Thank you. Okay, Mukaddesa, you're up.
Okay, so I'll go with what Secretary Clinton said yesterday. She said that she's an optimist but worries. I want to say I'm a stubborn optimist but worries, you know. And I'll end it there. And just one final thing I want to say this is that people don't choose tragedies. today we don't have to, choose between whether we should worry about Ukraine or whether we should worry about Afghanistan. It's both of them are tragedies, different set of context, of course. But let's all try to aim for a world, where we don't have to choose between tragedies. Everybody has it their own way. Let's make sure, each of you, that the women of Afghanistan are not forgotten, but also that they are known for who they are, not as victims, but as stubborn optimists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was fabulous. Let's listen to the voices of Afghan women.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Francesca. I don't know about you, but I told Mukadesa she'd ought to just use her time here in the U.S. to plan her presidential campaign. All the things. Thank you so much, Rena. Thank you, Ambassador Ross. Thank you. Okay, so for our final conversation this morning, we are so thrilled to, quite frankly, have one of the bravest women in the world right here with us. Nobel Peace Prize laureate, the woman who took on ISIS, Nadia Murad, is here with us. And she's going to be in conversation this morning with Kawala, Vital Voices board member, and as you heard yesterday, one of the most dynamic women of not only Cameroon, but Africa. Oh, you got it.
Good morning, everybody. One of the most amazing things about Vital Voices is, I'm sitting here being able to talk to Nadia Murad, whose story I read about, I think it was 2015 for me, and I thought this is the absolute one of the bravest women who has ever walked the earth. So Nadia, it's so tremendous to be here with you. I've had privilege of a few minutes of conversation where I have been blown away, and I hope that we can just share a little bit of that with the audience. Can you tell us what is the situation of Yazidi women today?
Thank you so much for having me. Whether in Ukraine, Afghanistan, or Iraq, women always pay a high price during conflict and long after. We're not simply casualties. Our rights and bodies are the first to be treated away in any crisis. Yazidi women have experienced the most extreme form of violence in the past 8 years. ISIS used sexual violence as a weapon of war to destroy my community. They took over 6,000 women and children, including myself, 5 of my sisters, 11 of my sisters-in-law, and tens of my nieces and friends and relatives. And more than 1/3 are still being held captive. That is, over 2,800 women and children that have been subjected to violence and abuse for 8 years. My niece was days old when she was taken with her mother into captivity in 2014. And this August, she will be 8 years old if she is alive. Because the last time we heard from her mother was 5 years ago when she was in Syria. And we don't know. And that's the story of 2,800 families, Yazidi families, that are still waiting for their loved ones to be returned. But most of them, like my family, don't know if they are still alive or not. It is easy to be outraged by the situation. But these women need more. They need our action. To date, authorities have still not set out a plan to search for and rescue the missing
women and children who are still in some parts of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey with the ISIS families or ISIS themselves. Even after the captivity, women and survivors rarely receive the support they need to heal and recover. And displacement comes where I lived for over a year with my family and friends. Women do not have privacy, basic supplies, or psychological care. For those who have returned back to Sinjar, to their homeland, the land of genocide, the land that is covered with mass graves. As many of you know, ISIS committed a genocide against my people. So far, more than 83 mass graves have been found in Sinjar. The homeland was destroyed. Basic services were destroyed. And there are so many political issues and security. So those women who have returned to Sinjar lack access to education, work opportunities, and security. They went back because they didn't want ISIS. ISIS' goal was to eradicate the Yazidis, but these women and the 150,000 people who have returned to Sinjar are telling that we won't let ISIS' goal to be achieved. They are there, they went back to nothing, and we should follow them. We should follow them to their homeland and invest in them, rebuild the homeland and provide security.
Thank you so much for giving us that situation. And I think, as you rightly said, we are in this context where we talk about Iraq yesterday, Afghanistan the next day, Ukraine. In my continent and in my country, women and children are facing ISIS in the form of Boko Haram in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Niger, and in Chad. We have conflict in Ethiopia, very unprecedented, that we did not expect. And I want you to speak just a little bit before we talk about your initiative, because I think the way that you are addressing solutions is so interesting, because when you are faced with a dictator, when you're faced with terrorists, you said to me backstage, they want to destroy you beyond the moment. They are very conscious that their attacks are only going to last for a limited amount of time, but the destruction that they want to bring is to the very soul of the community, to the dignity of the human being. And that resonated so much with me, because that's what I see in my country, that's what I see in Nigeria, that's what we're hearing from Ukraine today. You know, how have you taken this into account as you work on Nadia's initiative? What are you doing to address these core elements of rebuilding?
Yeah, so the initiative is working to end the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war through international accountability and gender equality. Right now, our efforts are focused on rebuilding Sinjar so that survivors can go back and restart their lives in Sinjar, in their homeland. We are also working to pursue justice through national and international trials to hold ISIS accountable, and through facilitating reparations for survivors in Iraq through Nadia's initiative, the Global Survivors Fund that I have co-founded with my friend, Dr. Dennis Mukwege. And, you know, we're also telling the other NGOs that are already working in Iraq, in displacement camps, and governments that there is a better way to help these women and girls, survivors. It is important that we listen to them. It is important that their voices are heard and that their need is our first priority. You know, what I'm proud of is that all the work is done in collaboration with the Yazidi survivors on the ground, because they know the best what they need. We cannot just build and send the support and based on what we think is good for them. You know, they went through a lot and they are willing to go back, they are willing to testify, they are willing to collaborate with us, and all they need is us to be with them, you know, to give them our attention.
Right. I think I heard something in just the previous panel that came out very clearly that, yes, awful things happen to women in almost every war, every time there is conflict. And I think that it's because women as bearers of life symbolize that destruction. Somebody who ultimately wants to destroy you, wants to go to that very core. But I understand what you're saying in terms of, despite the fact that awful things have happened to women, and they said it in the panel before, that does not mean the sole definition of women who've gone through conflict is victims. They've gone through the situation, and so they have an ability to bring the solution that's most adapted to their needs. I think I see this in the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon. I see it in the Boko Haram crisis. Sometimes people are stuck when they hear you. They think, okay, this is awful. You do have an initiative. There are things that are going on. What can ordinary people do to support? What can Vital Voices members do? What can people who are online do?
I think they can do a lot, and right now, you know, you can go to our website at Nadia's initiative to learn more about the Yazidi story, to see the work we are doing on the ground with the survivors and the local communities. You can contribute resources and join our advocacy efforts. You can add your voice to ours. We need you to share our story. Support women internationally and locally by standing up for gender equality in your own community. Violence against women happens everywhere, so we need everyone to help change these norms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very clear, and I think there's also something that you mentioned, which is that support the initiatives where survivors are in the lead, where they are really at the heart, they're at the table, you know, constructing the solutions. The solutions are not easy, and I think we've heard from the first two panels, it was definitely in our discussion, that while there are some commonalities when you're dealing with terrorists, when you're dealing with dictators, when you're dealing with autocrats, they have an absolute plan for destruction. Their plan is long-term, but we also still need to look at every situation specifically. I think one of the things that the world has gotten wrong is that we want a quick fix. We want to be able to do 1, 2, 3. We want to be able to repeat the solution that we did in another situation, but every single situation is specific. And definitely I can say as an African who lives in a country in conflict, and as an African who works with women who are survivors, that this is one of the greatest frustrations, is that people want it to be easy, they want to be superficial. So before I get to my last question, I'm just going to, Nadia has written a book which is available on Amazon, which tells her story in detail. She was pointing out to me that 20 minutes is simply not enough to tell her story, and it's not enough to tell anybody's story. So it's important for all of us as we work on conflict, as we work in situations, to take the time to learn, to go in depth. And I'm going to move towards my closing question to ask you, Nadia, what gives you hope right now? What is, what stories, what elements do you see as promising for your future? And also, I learned you have a very global view, so for our future as women. Yeah.
For me, having this conversation gives me hope. And you might say, well, it's happening, but, sexual violence comes with a lot of shame and stigma. And I'm telling you from my personal experience that it's very hard to talk about. And it has been for so long taboo, especially where I come from. Silence on this subject makes perpetrators think they can get away with. But I'm glad that finally, that sexual violence is finally being recognized by the international community as a war crime, and that now we are talking about it. The more attention we bring, the more energy we can build to take action toward justice, accountability, and prevention. So this gives me hope that you are listening, and we are now seeing this happening in Ukraine. And the world and the media, they move on very fast because there are so many things going on in the world, but women cannot move on that fast because they were destroyed in my community, in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, and other places, and that cannot, it's not like any other thing that they can just move on. I've been doing this work in the past 8 years, and it is not easy, but I know that is important, because if we didn't share our stories, it may happen again in another place and to another woman. And that's why the title of my book was To Be the Last Girl with a Story Like Mine. And I hope that I will be the last girl while I'm alive.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You give us hope. Most certainly, you give us hope. Thank you so much for, on behalf of all of the women who have gone through sexual violence, to your bravery, your ability to speak about it, begins to rebuild your human dignity. You're taking back your power, but you're also taking power for all of the women and girls who have gone through this. So thank you. It is such an honor to meet you and to have been able to talk with you. Thank you.